The oxygen sensor is one of many automotive innovations that help reduce exhaust emissions. The oxygen sensor monitors how well the fuel is burning inside the combustion chamber and helps the ECU adjust the air-fuel ratio. And the post-catalytic converter O2 sensor monitors how well the catalytic converter is working. That makes these sensors extremely important, and they present a lot of symptoms once they fail. The most common symptoms of a bad oxygen sensor are misfires, black smoke, difficulty starting the engine, poor fuel economy, poor performance, and failed emissions tests. In some cases, you will also notice a rough idle and a check engine light. Different problems with the catalytic converter are also possible. 9 symptoms of a bad oxygen sensor. 1. Check engine light. The check engine light can indicate any number of problems with the drivetrain and its sensors. There is also a chance that the oxygen sensor is bad without triggering the check engine light. But if you see the warning light, diagnosing the problem becomes fairly easy. All you need to do is scan the fault codes and see where it gets you. You can scan the fault codes at any AutoZone or Napa store for free. If one of the O2 sensors is bad, the fault codes you will get range between P0150 to P0167. Each code in that range refers to a specific fault with the O2 sensor. A modern car can have up to 8 oxygen sensors, so it's important to figure out which one is causing the problem. But any code in this range means you will have to replace the sensor unless the wiring is damaged. 2. Misfiring. The upstream oxygen sensors are directly responsible for how the engine control unit adjusts the air-fuel mixture. The mass airflow sensor also serves the same purpose, but the oxygen sensor has more authority. If the oxygen sensor notices that the exhaust gases contain too much oxygen, it tells the ECU to increase fuel delivery. That means if the sensor is malfunctioning, it can enrich or lean out the air-fuel mixture. Since a lean air-fuel mixture burns a lot slower, it will still be burning when the exhaust valve opens. That causes backfires, it can damage the catalytic converter, and it registers as a misfire. And fuel in a rich air-fuel mixture won't be atomized properly, and chances are high that it doesn't ignite at all. That again registers as a misfire. This can also trigger the check engine light and fault codes ranging from P0300 to P0312. The P0300 means a random misfire, and other codes refer to specific cylinder misfires. If these are the only codes you get, chances are the spark plugs or ignition coils are bad. But if you get them together with O2 sensor codes, replace the sensor first and see if that solves it. 3. Poor fuel economy. In order for the engine to run optimally, it needs the right air-fuel ratio, which is usually 14.7 to 1, but it ranges somewhat. When the air-fuel ratio is optimal, the fuel burns efficiently, which increases thermal efficiency, thus increasing power and reducing fuel consumption. Since a bad oxygen sensor messes with the air-fuel ratio, it leads to too much or too little fuel. If there is too much fuel in the combustion chamber, a lot of that fuel will be unburnt and wasted. You might even notice a smell of gasoline coming from the exhaust. A lean air-fuel mixture technically reduces fuel consumption, but it also reduces power. That means you will have to press the gas pedal a lot more and rev the engine higher, which by itself increases consumption. The fuel consumption increase won't be that noticeable, especially if you don't travel a lot. But it will show on the onboard computer, so keep an eye on that. 4. Black smoke coming out of the exhaust. Black smoke coming out of the exhaust is most common in vehicles with diesel engines. Diesel engine already run a lot richer than gasoline engines, which produces a lot of soot and black smoke, and the richer the air-fuel mixture is, the more black smoke will come out of the exhaust. This is actually a really good way of diagnosing air-fuel mixture-related issues in diesel engines. It's important to mention that the smoke won't be constant and will only be noticeable when you punch the gas pedal. Excessive black smoke can also be caused by other faults, like a clogged air filter, a bad MAF sensor, a bad fuel pressure regulator, a clogged EGR valve, or bad injectors. With so many potential causes, it's important to diagnose the oxygen sensor properly. We will explain how a bit later. 5. Poor performance. As we already mentioned, the air-fuel ratio directly affects the thermal efficiency of an engine, and thus its performance. When the oxygen sensor goes bad, causing a lean air-fuel mixture, the car will have noticeably less power at both lower and higher RPMs. Even getting the car to move in first gear can be a struggle, and you will have to rev the engine a lot higher. And if the ratio is too high, the car will sputter at lower RPMs and might even stall. At higher RPMs, it won't be that noticeable. Also, if the ratio is too lean, the car will have a higher idle speed and will be more responsive to lighter gas pedal inputs. But if you push the gas pedal suddenly, it will likely stall. And if the ratio is too high, the idle will be lower than usual. But again, air-fuel ratio problems can be caused by dozens of different faults. 6. Difficulty starting the engine. Difficulty starting the engine is something you will definitely notice if the O2 sensor is bad. That's especially true when the engine is cold or when you first start it in the morning. The car will crank noticeably longer than usual, and it will struggle to fire up. That forces you to crank the engine a few times before it fires up. The reason it happens is that the oxygen sensor is reporting a rich air-fuel mixture when in fact it's lean. That causes the engine control unit to reduce the fuel delivery even further, making the car nearly impossible to start. It's important to mention that this same problem can be caused by a bad coolant temperature sensor, a weak fuel pump, bad injectors, or a bad mass airflow sensor, among other things. 7. Rough idle. A rough idle means the engine is sputtering, the idle speed is irregular, and the car feels like it's going to stall at any moment. That's a consequence of a rich air-fuel mixture. In those conditions, there is so much fuel and so little oxygen that the spark plug can't ignite it. That causes the misfires, as we already mentioned. But more often, there is just enough oxygen that the fuel does ignite, but efficiently enough. That means the firing is too weak, leading to a low idle speed, and it's extremely irregular. For example, one cylinder fires normally, the second one is weak, the third one doesn't fire at all, and so on. At the same time, it also causes the engine to shake and vibrate excessively, acting as if an engine mount is bad. 8. Failed emissions test. The point of all the sensors in a car, including the oxygen sensor, is to lower exhaust emissions. The upstream sensor makes sure the combustions are as efficient as they can be, and the downstream sensors make sure the catalytic converter is operating optimally. That's why any and all oxygen sensor issues directly reflect on the exhaust emissions. Even if the oxygen sensor is just starting to fail and the symptoms are barely noticeable, chances are the car will still fail the emissions test. And in extreme cases, it can be as bad as raw fuel coming out of the exhaust, not to mention the black smoke in diesel engines. 9. Catalytic converter problems. A poorly working catalytic converter that's still in one piece will pretty much only present one symptom, and that's a strong sulfuric smell. But that rarely happens because of a bad oxygen sensor. What happens more often is catalytic converter damage. The catalytic converter sits right in front of the exhaust valves, and all those misfires, backfires, soot, and unburnt fuel clog it up and damage the ceramic honeycomb inside. An even bigger problem is a lean air-fuel mixture. A lean air-fuel mixture makes less carbon deposits and doesn't have any raw fuel. However, it does significantly increase combustion chamber temperature and causes catalytic converter overheating. That in turn leads to cracks forming in the ceramic honeycomb, and soon after, it will fall apart. The only solution is to replace the entire catalytic converter, which won't be cheap. How to diagnose an oxygen sensor. There are two ways you can go about diagnosing an oxygen sensor. The first is to scan the fault codes, which don't always work, and the second is to monitor the live data. But since pretty much the same tool is used for both, scan the fault codes first. If you get any of the P0150 to P0167 fault codes, do a quick wire inspection and then replace the sensor. But if you are not getting any fault codes, live data is the best way to do it. You can use a multimeter, but what that method uncovers is extremely limited, plus it's much more difficult. Instead, get yourself a $30 OBD2 scanner that supports live data, fire up the car, and watch what the oxygen sensor does. You will see a wave frequency with a consistent amplitude. You are looking for any inconsistencies in that amplitude, and you want to see how it responds to gas pedal inputs. If you notice that the response doesn't match the RPMs or gas pedal, it means the oxygen sensor is bad. Another good thing about this method is that you can test all 4 sensors in a matter of a few minutes. Cost to replace an oxygen sensor. Oxygen sensors are fairly expensive for how small they are. A new sensor will set you back anywhere between $80 and $150 at AutoZone. And if you go for an OEM unit for a newer car, it will be at least $150. As for labor, it all depends. The oxygen sensor is exposed to extreme heat, water, and salt, which means it seizes in a matter of a year or two. That's why it's hard to estimate how long it will take to remove. It also depends on how complicated the car is, but in most cases, it takes between 30 minutes and an hour. That's $50 to $100 on average. And with the average price of an oxygen sensor being $100, you expect a total of $200. And that's if the sensor's already diagnosed. If the repair shop has to break out the OBD scanner and monitor live data, add another $50 to $100 to the total cost. On a positive note, you can replace the sensor yourself, and all you need is an oxygen sensor socket that you can pick up for less than 10 bucks. To summarize what we talked about in this video, the most important thing to understand is that the oxygen sensor directly affects the air-fuel ratio. That means all the symptoms apart from obvious fault codes are shared with other components related to the fuel and air intake system. That includes misfires, poor performance, poor fuel economy, rough idle, and so on. That's why it's a bad idea to rely on the symptoms alone without diagnosing the cause. I hope this video helped. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and follow so you don't miss any of my videos.